So look, man, I'm very glad that we are doing it. And maybe just by word of like preface, I should say, for folks who are going to listen to this, we were sitting on at a coffee shop on Orchard now about a month and a half ago, and I think we just intended to catch up. And during that conversation, it just came really fresh to me that you're one of those people who has been reflective enough through the course of your work opportunities and situations, different countries you've lived in, different titles you've held, to like almost pick up and make a knight's code or a Bushido code out of the things that you've been seeing and doing and learning. Not too many people are maybe curious enough or reflective enough or whatever else it is. And the whole time we're sitting there having coffee, one, it was like just great. And I was like, I almost forgot how thoughtful Andrew Murphy is about this stuff. But I also thought, just this conversation we're having here on Orchard Road should be recorded for posterity. There's so many cool ideas that the man's laying down. So this is actually a way to redress the fact that we didn't record that at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of it came from trying to explain to other people. So one, being a manager and trying to manage people who don't, like, in some cultures don't culturally understand how to do these things. And then also trying to figure out there are different stages, and account management's very different, sales, which is very different from BD, for example. And so like managing a Thai sales force, like you don't want someone who's just going to be a sales guy, because a lot of it comes down to building content and trust and giving suggestions where you show that you truly know the business.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, okay, well, then what I want to do is I want to hire like a management consultant type person and then make them become outgoing. And so how am I going to explain that to them and explain to them like how to form relationships, how to break the glass that people naturally put between themselves and stuff like that. And it started with that, and then through also trying to help other people as they start their careers.
So we'll give folks a little orientation. It's tough to know where to start. We could start with the day of your birth, but maybe just give a couple sentences. You're at Cooley now. Yep. I think without describing it like you're gonna do right now, it's actually one of those roles where you can't really just write it on LinkedIn and everybody's clear about what you're doing. So I don't know, maybe just kind of start there and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I am from a venture capital and private equity background. I spent the last 3 years at Gojek, first building international operations and then building the enterprise sales team. And so now I have this weird role, which I think most people might not understand. And even when you join Cooley, they're like, hey, this is what the role is, but you can kind of turn it into whatever you want it to be, because there's so many different ways to run it. Because we've got people who do it in life sciences, we have people who do it in so many different sectors. But what I do is I work with founders and funds, because what we do is transactions. So we work within the venture capital space. We form more VC funds than any other law firm in the world, because we only focus on VC. We do tons of venture deals, and we've also been #1 globally for venture-backed IPOs for the last 15 years. And so as a result, in the way that I work with founders and funds, I help founders with capital introductions, business development introductions, hiring, international expansion, change management and structure. And then I help funds sort of connect to each other, and I help funds connect to deal flow, because I see as a result of all this, like 20 or 30 deals a week. And then for both of them, I sort of help them leverage our global network, because we have we do close to $2 billion in revenue a year. We have 17 offices around the world. We have like 1,600 lawyers. And so we're pretty much at any given point in time, we're across the table from any large premium venture capital fund in the world. We work with like 8,000 private companies a year. And then we do like 2,000 to 3,000 venture deals a year. And so the idea is to sort of help them leverage that network to, like, let's say it's an entrepreneur and he's doing SME financial management. So he has a portal to help them manage their finances and, any receivables, etc. We probably have a founder who did the same thing, over the last 6 years. So this guy's just starting
Right.
a journey. This other guy, he's done it for the last 6 years. And so when I talk to this guy, and it's clear that they might not understand how to look at CAC or how to look at sales, instead of completely just saying like, hey, because who am I to say anything? I'm not a founder. I've never built that business. I can connect him to somebody who I spoke to 5 years ago and then be like, hey, can you speak to him and help him understand like the way that you look at international expansion and hiring and sales. And so that's sort of what I do. And so my official title is I'm the head of business development for Asia Pacific for Cooley.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a funny thing because, you know, in my line of work, people are constantly using the same terminology to mean all kinds of different things. So
Yeah.
especially a word like business development in a tech firm, it's like a BDR. That's like bottom of the stack, an entry level job, and
Yeah.
you're cold calling strangers and convincing them to take the second meeting. In law firms that I've seen, especially across Asia, business development really means marketing. Classically, what we classically call marketing. You know, making sure that the background on my Zoom screen is like to brand and stuff like that all falls under business development.
Yeah.
And then when you go to like the big professional services firms, like business development is a key activity that people with, you know, 2 degrees and 15 years plus experience with a title partner, that's something that they do. And it's, you know, sort of a synonym for rainmaking. But that's your title. And obviously it means its own thing inside your
Well,
world.
I think it even means different things within Cooley. But for
Yeah.
me, like the way that I differentiate between business development and sales is like sales is you've got a target. You might be an inside salesperson or an outside salesperson, and you're like selling like software or thesauruses. And this is if I hit my on target earnings, then I'm going to get a certain amount of money. And every time you go into a relationship, the focus is this is a lead that's been qualified or you're some part of the qualification process. Like sales is building an effective machine. Business development for me, I think, is like it's actually a lifestyle that you have to commit to. And so what I mean by that is like I guess you could use a couple different metaphors, but like let's say your passion is golf. And so you spend your whole life golfing, and because you spend your whole life golfing with other golfers, you can sell golf clubs, you could potentially manage, you know, a golf course, or you could be a golf pro. And it doesn't, you know, it can go in whatever sort of order. And there are people who've done all of that. And so like for me, what I've focused on is I focus just on the venture capital and private equity space. And I've picked this ecosystem to basically spend my life in. And so I've gone from, you know, being an analyst at a private equity fund to, you know, working in a venture capital fund on operations to then building businesses myself to then going to Gojek and now working at Cooley. And you commit yourself to basically this space. And so once you commit yourself to the space, you start sort of have to start like mapping out the space, like who matters, who are the key players. And then as you start mapping it out, you have to find the context to then go meet those people and then build those relationships. And it's less about something that I'm trying to sell right now. Like all the relationships that I work with at Cooley, you know, we've got a great product and I wouldn't want to have a product that was bad because I wouldn't ever want to sell them. So like, because I look at all these people as they're my relationships. I'm part of a greater community and I want to add value to that community. So I think if you want to sort of follow this path, the important thing is you need to find an ecosystem or a space that you're really passionate about that you can commit to. And it's less about committing to being a marketing person or a salesperson or anything like that. You have to commit to a whole space and then understand it intimately, and then intermix both your life and your work, where it's sort of that like work-life harmony sort of thing that Jeff Bezos says, where you just enjoy it. Like the same people who I'd work with, regardless of which part of this industry I end up working in my various roles, they're the same people that I play tennis with on the weekends or, you know, or at my birthday party. Like they're just my friends. And so my life and my work has become completely intermixed. And my hope is that like in everything that I do, that I'm adding value to their lives as well. So like if I find a new product, and so you're constantly mapping out the market. And so in mapping out the market, I think there's sort of 3 pillars to building a relationship. And you also have to really focus on first, like, how do you position yourself? So actually, I'll the 3 pillars thing I'll jump to later. But so the first part is, how do you position yourself, and how does that align with your long-term goals? Because if you are committing yourself to an ecosystem, you're not committing yourself to marketing or to sales. Like in sales, it's inside sales, outside sales, manager of salespeople. If you're committing yourself to BD, it's a lot less clear path. So you have to have these milestones of like, all right, so for me, like one day I want to run my own VC fund, but there's no clear path for that unless I wanted to stay in the VC track, which might take longer and might have less upside along the way. So then within those milestones, how do you frame the way that you speak about yourself? Because like, unfortunately, most people think in heuristics. So like there's that story from Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. So they say like, yeah, so Jake's a really nice guy, really quiet, super friendly. You know, I've known him for years. He lives down the street. We don't always see him that often, but like whenever you talk to him, he's super helpful. Like he just seems like a really nice person. And if you ask somebody like, hey, so do you think Jake is a librarian or a farmer? Even though he's 4 times more likely to be a farmer, they'll say a librarian. So when you talk about yourself, you have to be very structured and very intentional in the way that you introduce yourself, because you're going to be, as you're market mapping out the whole market, you're going to be meeting tons of people. And you need to get to the point where the way you describe yourself is almost like an inside salesperson. Where you're like, I've done this, this, and this. My specialty is this. And have some sort of part of it that's memorable, because you want them to put you on the shelf in their mind in a certain place. And then after you've mapped out the market and you've formed that initial relationship, you start being accretive, which sort of brings me to the next part, which is the 3 pillars thing.
Yeah, but let me just like ask you something there, because I think the point that you just made is easy for people to maybe lose track of and think it's like a self-help point or something else you brought up. But this idea of heuristics is actually really powerful. We used to talk about, say, in finance, right? Where depending on the market that you're in, Singapore dresses a little down because it's hot here. But if you go to Sydney or New York, and I mean, maybe this is a decade old, but it doesn't matter for the illustration. Folks would wear ties. The gentlemen would wear ties, and the ties were not cheap. Right, they're like $200-300 a tie. So they're like Hermes or Ferragamo or something. So I don't think they were showing off their wealth, because $200 doesn't show off the kind of wealth that those folks have. Right, so they're saying something else by wearing that kind of tie. And what we determined was that, like, it's a heuristic, right? It encodes a message, which is something to say like, look, I understand that that's too much to pay for a piece of printed silk that you hang around your neck with zero function, but I'm doing it because it kind of cuts quickly to the chase as to who I may be. And so it isn't as simple as just like, oh, that's just vanity or a glossy show of wealth. And then the point that you made about the way in which you introduce yourself, you could maybe read that in some cheap little sales bulletin, but there's a deeper truth to it. What you said about it gives people a shelf on which, and maybe in like a large warehouse, there's a shelf where they know where to put you. Whereas if you go for some abstract bunch of sentences, they just like, you seem like a great person, but I don't know, I can't remember tomorrow who you are, what to do, because you just didn't even help me.
Yeah, so it's like varying degrees of intimacy and how to build intimacy quickly, which is part of like, if you're building relationships at scale and you're mapping out a market, you have to quickly tell them who you are and why they should trust you.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I know this space, and then that sort of brings to like the 3 pillars thing, which is like authenticity. Like, are you an authentic person? Intimacy, which you can create a number of different ways. Like, we dress the same way, or we went to the same school, or you talk over WhatsApp and you use a lot of emojis, or we go out and have drinks and I tell you about my childhood. That builds that sort of sense of intimacy. And then the 3rd pillar is frequency. So how often am I communicating with you? But in that first introduction, I think it's the most important thing, because you set the framework for the rest of your relationship. And if I'm not going to be speaking to you all the time, at least then, especially if I say, Andrew Murphy does 3 different things. He does this, this, and that. And he's from here. And so what I try to do is make it very clear what I am, what I've done, what I do, and then try to say one thing that's memorable that they'll remember. So like, and the reason why I do that is I found that it's helped me throughout my whole career. Like my first job I ever got, or one of my first jobs was at a radio station. And the lady only remembered me because I told her about a summer I spent in Thailand when I was 14, at an elephant training camp. And she interviewed hundreds of people who went to my school. It was a job at my school's radio station. And she's like, oh, I want the elephant guy.
Right.
And so
Right.
like now for me, that's the Cambodia story when I ran a brewery in Cambodia. And like, I think that you keep people context, you make it so they can remember who you are and what you do. So that when they go home and they talk to their wife, they can say it. And then you can then use the authenticity, intimacy, and frequency to then build a deeper relationship. And then you have to also have context. So like, for example, with a successful tech billionaire, like I can't just reach out, even if we have a previous relationship, be like, hey, how was your lunch? But I find context to then reach out again. And that's what helps me build that frequency, if that sort of makes sense. But there's so much that it matters so much that you set the narrative of who you are at the beginning to even start the process of all the rest of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where, like right now, for example, I guess Cooley means that you're being constantly put in the path of interesting people on things like Zoom calls and so on.
Yeah.
But I know that it hasn't been like that in the past. I mean, when you're brewing beers in Cambodia, you're not being put on constant Zoom meetings with high-powered investors.
Yeah.
But I take it that this is actually the tool that you use in both those situations.
Yeah, I think it's the tool that you use in all situations.
Yeah.
Like doing enterprise sales at Gojek. So if you look at the framework, there's intro, who I am, why you should trust me. Then there's the authenticity, for intimacy, and frequency. And then afterwards, like this is it goes back to what I was saying about using management consultants for sales. All right, so any sales guy can like get in there, and then you're in there, and then you're like, oh wait, Grab sells the same thing, or some other guy sells phone books, and it's like, all right, well now the hard work begins, because I was able to get in, I was able to ingratiate myself, I was able to build a relationship with the leader, but how do I stay in? And the only way to stay in is like content is king. So you have to build trust, you have to show people that you understand what you're talking about. And that's why, so when I would talk to these management consultant people and try to convert them, I was like, all right, so, because they're very, like, most of them were very uptight and they were kind of shy. And I'd be like, all right, so guys, like imagine we sell phone books and someone else sells phone books, and we're in a meeting with the client, and randomly, and this, this is a bad example, but it's supposed to get them to understand. I was like, and randomly you take out a clown nose out of your pocket and you put it on your nose, and you do the rest of the meeting as if it's not there at all. I was like, the purpose is that you're memorable and that you've broken the glass between you, because so that's what the second pillar is all about, is how do you break the glass between you? Like in an interview process, if I make you feel like you and I are friends, and it's you and I versus the employer, or I'm trying to help you, you and I are friends, the glass is broken. And then I'm like, well, how much do you really need to accept this job? And in the same way, like the clown nose is an example of like, how do you break the glass between you and the other person? Because in business, more often than not, everything is oppositional, and people are wondering how much intimacy they can give you. And so if you're working as like a BD person, you're networking and building relationships at scale, you need to figure out how to build intimacy quickly. And that's like the secret to all of it. Yeah.
Right. So what's Andrew's answer for himself on the intimacy piece?
I mean, I think it goes down to that. It's like intro, the 3 pillars, showing trust, showing that you know what you're talking about. And then you also have to understand who they are and what they like. Like if they don't like going out for drinks, then play board games or like send them like cool, like if someone likes flower arrangements, like, oh, I also like flowers, like here's, have you ever seen that movie with Nicolas Cage about the ghost orchid? I don't know. Adaptation.
Yeah. Well, I would say after knowing you over a number of years, that another thing that you do all the time, which I think is an intimacy shortcut, is you constantly put things forward at some risk, right? It's almost like telling a joke, right? I mean, it's not that you tell jokes nonstop in meetings, but in a more conversational way.
Yeah.
If you tell a joke, you kind of you put your neck on the chopping block a little bit, because if it's flat, you kind of can't come back, right? It's like you took
Yeah.
a risk. But if it works, and even if it just works a little, like people just smile, they don't like bend over laughing, but they just have a bit of a smile. It's acknowledged, like you took a little bit of a risk to try
Yeah.
that. And I would say, knowing you for a while, I'm watching professionals, right? Because I have to sort of study this at the moment. We do all the time.
Yeah.
When you offer some things, like, and you said content is king, content shows up here. It's like
Yeah.
you offer an idea, you put forward like a conjecture, maybe things are like this. Hey, I read this article and I think the guy was a fool, right? All of these are actually small risks, but
Yeah.
people know that there's risk in them. And I think that's something that you do really naturally, and maybe is somehow like accounted for in what you're saying, like the way in which you interact, just putting some stuff out and
The other
taking what seems like a small social risk.
I think the other thing is like you have to genuinely really find people interesting, because otherwise like this whole system would make you very manipulative. And also if you don't remember, like I know that you and your brother were both with GLG and he was in Hong Kong, and like I remember all of those things.
Yeah.
And I remember who you're friends with, and I remember everything about them, and then also like who they're friends with. And so if you have to be genuinely interested in that stuff as well. And that allows, that risk is actually part of also like understanding and celebrating the person. Like I'm gonna tell you something that I think you're interested in as well. And because of that, maybe in my mind it's de-risked because it's part of the process of like understanding you better as a person. Is like,
So
yeah.
so when you found people where you're unclear about whether or not they're genuinely interested in the human beings,
Yeah.
do you feel like you can train them up? You can turn that switch on, or do you basically go, "I'm sorry, that's a deal breaker. You can't be in."
I think there's always going to be a ceiling for people like that. And so then they could end up being like more content people where they come in for the trust part afterwards.
Mhm.
And then because there's different levels to it. You know, you have your BD people, then you might have salespeople who help build relationships when the BD person can't, who's like one level below. And then you're gonna have like account managers, and you're also gonna have program managers. And the program managers are gonna be like, oh, this is this analytics project that we could run. And so if I had someone who wasn't like actually genuinely interested in people, I would put them under like account management and program management, and then teach them how to run a program, because hopefully they're at least interested in that. Because if they're not like people oriented, usually like, all right, cool, I understand. And then I try to emphasize to them like how important their content is, and how like, and then you try to celebrate every time they do a great presentation or they really understand something. And you even use language like in Ben Horowitz is like what you do is who you are. He talks about how people intentionally set culture. So for example, like this one software company had big trouble with burn. And so when the new CEO came in, he said, we don't stay in hotels where you can't see your car from the window. And so for me, like whenever I had a WhatsApp group with my team, like I would be like SWAT Thailand. And every time I'd be like, hey, you know, you've been chosen for a select group, and use words like, you know, like this one sales guy who wasn't really a good culture fit. He was like, why do we have to go to the office at 8 a.m. when everybody else gets in at 10? And I was like, oh man, Eagles fly high. And so you intentionally set that culture of like building in, it's like, oh man, that was an amazing presentation. Like they're totally going to trust you. You celebrate those people. And so if they weren't interested in that path and they couldn't get there all the way there, I would try to celebrate them to push them in that direction. Because I don't think that they're really going to be a good business development person. You have to be interested in people first.
So we have to chase the thread about people who think they're going to be great at sales or BD, and aren't, and people
Yeah.
who think they're going to be terrible at it or hate it, but succeed, and so on. Because I think that by itself is just like a fascinating pattern, probably driven by a big general lack of understanding about what goes on in the
Yeah.
craft of either business development or sales, and also a lack of understanding as to what makes people great at this. So there's I'd say we're probably of a very similar school, which is you can take sculpture majors and, you know, people who are overtly trying to avoid sales roles,
Yeah.
grab them, train them up in the right way, and make them into just sensational business development pros.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it's just about their ability to connect with people. But there's two different ways, like a pure sales organization, like at a software org, very often like that's actually a science. It's like inside sales is going to process 100 leads a week, then outside sales is going to go get them. And so I think that takes that science and machinery, like that's not what I practice and that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in building like a hybrid of the two. But I would never go through that sort of, like, I feel like that can be kind of like, it could be kind of soul crushing in some ways for someone who's like more interested in the other side. But also on the other side, like it is less of a science.
Okay, so for you, how's it a hybrid? Like which parts are you taking and which parts are you leaving out?
So I think like in enterprise sales, at least, it's less of a, you can do it in a less scientific way where you find all the conglomerates or top organizations that you want to get a hold of. And maybe you have a business development person who's working with, government officials, media houses, and he's leveraging his whole network going out, and like, it's like a launcher from Uber. You go into town, you try to meet like all these influential people. And then over time, at least for me, because I've been in Southeast Asia for 9 years, these relationships, I call it like a lighthouse strategy. So in my lighthouse strategy, whenever I want to launch in a country, I have like conglomerate relationships, private equity relationships, media house relationships, celebrity relationships, and those people, whatever I'm building, whatever coalition I'm building for the company in that country, they will help me find the right people. And so in a lighthouse strategy, I can build deep relationships with those 10 people and know that I can bring any product to market. Now, for like, let's say I'm looking at the top 100 accounts and there may be like 20 that I can't hit. Then I have like a hardcore sales guy who I just heavily incentivize and be like, listen, man, you can like triple your monthly salary, which is like way more than I even make. If you just, I need you to just get me these 20 leads so we can have like full coverage in this country. And so that's sort of a hybrid there. And then below it, then I like all the relationships I have, they're like deep relationships. So I'll hang out with those people on the weekends, I'll be talking to them all the time. So if it blows up with the account manager, I can always swoop back in and I can save that account. Whereas sometimes the salesperson, they're like, I'm a sales guy. I already got paid for that. I don't want to be their friend. Like I don't even like sending cold messages on LinkedIn. I'm like, all right, cool. That's fine. Like that's sort of your business. So then once they're done, then you have full enterprise coverage in the country. Then it comes down to sort of what I was saying, which is like you build programs for how you manage those accounts, which go across multiple countries, which is like how you do advertising, how you do analytics. So that way it's almost like I'm the football coach. And when I call that play, my program manager can then go into that country with the account manager and be like, hey guys, so we're going to run, an analytics campaign. We're going to find the best price for a burger in Vietnam. And so then the account managers will work with the program manager and they'll learn how to do that, because otherwise normally in their day-to-day role, they only have like 20 accounts that they manage. So they don't necessarily need to know how to run an analytics campaign or how to run an advertising campaign. But the program manager will come there, and that allows me to also kind of scale myself. So that's how I look at it in a hybrid way versus having it be a total machine. But that might not work for SME sales or a product that can't get to scale very quickly. Yeah.
Okay, so that actually makes me think, because you see so many businesses and business models, and given your role at Cooley, you're seeing them at different stages of evolution. Do you see patterns out there that are particularly working well, like subscription models or individual user models? Like what are you seeing by the way that say just within B2B structures, what are patterns you're seeing in sales that make sense or are interesting?
I mean, so a lot of the companies that I work with, I think the biggest first step is, how do you land your first big client through, and sometimes that's through fundraising and through relationships. And those stories in and of themselves, because it can be so conglomerate oriented, can help you then fundraise more and more. Because unfortunately we're in a market where the velocity of capital is so fast and so sort of like crazy that some of it's just about momentum fundraising. So like I'm seeing companies that are doing 3 investment rounds in 1 year. And the reason why is you're sort of creating FOMO, and And the flip side of that is that you might have companies that might have better statistics, but the deal is stale. So they have like 40% of the market, but they haven't fundraised in 3 years, and their growth story isn't as significant. And as a result, they can't raise to the same degree now. Whereas this new guy, I guess it's just about timing the market. Like if you looked at Lazada in Vietnam, got into Vietnam way too early. It was flat for the longest time, and then all of a sudden it hockey sticked just at the end. And then you have people like Shopee who just blew by them and were able to fundraise a ton because the growth numbers that they could show were so much higher. So
Right.
a lot of it's sort of like milestone planning and then momentum fundraising and making sure that you understand, like you map out your ecosystem, both investors and clients very, very well, because building those relationships from day one is also very clear. Like when I was once building a coffee company in Indonesia, and I would know from day one that I wanted to get acquired by Nestle or JAB, these two different groups. And so I would start building relationships with them from day one. And so you sort of, it goes back to like building a sense of intimacy and making them feel bought in. So you'd be like, hey, head of Nestle, like, what do you think about this? Like, does this make sense? How would you do it? And then they tell you sort of what they're looking for. Yeah.
That's a hell of a thing, though. I think if you're, that's a really different mooring point for a sales team or even a founder. You say it's founder-led sales. Like we sell in order to drive things other than cash in the bank. Like we're selling so that we can show specific timing on specific kinds of partnerships, you know, with the intention of affecting some other decision elsewhere.
Yeah,
That's that makes me feel like I'm a naive guy.
I mean, just in the tech space right now, because there's just so much capital flying around it's slightly different in that like you're building a narrative more than anything else,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy.
But sales obviously still does matter, right? Like
Yeah.
I think the heady days of just, you know, sort of raising multiple rounds simply on the strength of a dream and a deck and a, you know, colorful set of horizons plus an engineering team maybe are gone. What do you see in terms of where when these folks get into later rounds and they actually have to build up a team? I'm asking that a little bit selfishly because I know a handful of the people who will be listening to this are founders, all with the exact same problem, which is how do I stop selling? I have to. I know I have to.
Yeah.
But some of them because they kind of love it, some of them because they're just stuck, some of them because it's tough for them to let go. I'm curious what you've seen there.
I mean, it's with every model, it's very different. So, and with every stage, it's very different. So, like for example, we have some life sciences clients, and the founder still does a lot of the sales himself because he creates like custom enzymes. And I was like, all right, dude, obviously you're gonna have to be involved in the final stages, but you need to get some younger person to at least start like pulling the leads together and qualifying the leads. Like give them a leads list of like 100 leads, give them a script so they can at least qualify the first 2 calls, and then make sure by the time you're involved, because this guy right now, he's both selling these enzymes to like giant Korean cosmetic companies and fundraising at the same time. And I was like, you can't do both. And so you need to figure out, you know, get a person for each of those. You can use a younger person for sales to at least qualify, because regardless, you're the scientist who built this like enzyme creating machine or whatever it is. And then on the fundraising side, just get a head of corporate development who can have those conversations as well. And they're going to do most of the documentation anyways. They'll pull you in and you're just going to be like, wheeled in, be like, hello, I'm a scientist. This is what I've created. Thank you, such and such, for doing the presentation. And then you close it off once it's highly qualified. And so a lot of it there is about sort of like time management and how you build the machine of sales in your org. And I agree with you. A lot of it's like, it shouldn't be founder led, or founders should just do sort of, I guess, what I did, where you're maintaining the relationships at the top, because God knows like accounts are always going to blow up and you're going to have to go in and save them. So if you're like, all right, I'm going to preserve my time and I'm going to sort of sit at the top, then you have to have very clear leads lists and still like have targets as well. And then you can sort of, I guess you can do sales in 2 different ways then in this scenario, if we're going into sort of a hypothetical. One is top down, which is sort of like what I do, like where I'm almost like an executive in residence at Cooley, and I know all the CEOs because I've like worked with them over time and I've known them. Or you can do bottom up, where you have leads lists and you're doing inside sales and those people report to somebody. Because if you're doing something that requires you to more boil the ocean, it's going to be target driven, and it's going to be a process of like driving quality funnel. So inside sales up to sales manager, up to you. But in each company, it's like super different with the product and how you're going to do it.
This idea of like hanging on to the relationship at a certain level with a certain quality, I'm really attracted to, in part because what I've seen is you can be incredibly efficient and productive. Once a relationship has a sufficient depth to it or quality to it, it actually doesn't take a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to see them once a month. And you can if you want to, if you just love their company, then that's great. But I've seen this personally in my career, and then with a lot of our clients too. They can be seeing people after 24 months, and it's like the enthusiasm for each other as a person is still there. The intimacy with, like the families and what they're up to, a general sense of, their businesses and their companies and where they're at, all stays very current.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the efficiency of that, it's like actually you can maintain 300-400 relationships with ease if you've already laid down the bedrock.
And that's why with market entry, I really believe in taking like a business development sort of stance where you can actually go so much faster if you're going like executive to executive. And also with like conglomerates, you can sort of take a creative approach. So like I once had a Vietnamese conglomerate, I went to the guy who was the head of the department that was relevant to me, and he was like, yeah, no way, you guys are too early. Then I went to one brother and he was like, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I don't want to talk to you. And then I found out this other brother had just moved back to Vietnam, and he was building this city in southern Vietnam. And I was like, all right, well, how can I help this guy? And he was like, oh, I'm trying to build a partnership with Coca-Cola to partner with me on this city in southern Vietnam. I was like, all right, cool. I'll get like my head of data science to come give a talk to your group and Coke's group. And after he's like, all right, cool. If you do that for me, I'll get the deal done for you in 7 days. And so like having that level of intimacy where you're like, not that, but it's like, all right, Mike, like, how are we going to get this done this week? Like, I need to get done this week. And that takes it completely out of the process. Because a lot of like the pitch process and stuff like that is just a formality, especially if it's something that's like relatively commoditized or there are clear savings that you're bringing to the client.
Yeah, right.
So she's like, all right, well, it's commodity, so it's priced between 14 and 17, and this is how we're going to differentiate ourselves or give you a discount. Or the flip side is like, dude, I'm saving you $1 million. Like, I can take a little bit off here, but like, now more than ever, because it's a pandemic, I've got to, take care of my employees and put their kids through school. So like, come on, what are you doing to me? And like, they'll keep pushing, like, well, now more than ever. And they're like, all right, fine, I'll call you back later. And then like on Friday, like, all right, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
We were that's so interesting. And by the way, I love the story, because any story that entails a guy's building a city, it sounds like something from the Old Testament, right? It's like, Solomon built a city. It turns out that there's one of 3 brothers in Vietnam building a city.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good war story. Did he get his city built with Coca-Cola?
Yeah, I think like all of the lifeguard stands also like were sponsored by Coke, and like some of the lamp posts were sponsored by Coke in the end.
It's a crazy old world, man.
Yeah.
There's weird stuff going on out there, but building a city alongside Coca-Cola is right up there.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about I think some of the stuff that you've seen in the past, because one of the things that's really funny, and when people listen to this, they won't necessarily appreciate straight away, is how many different things you've actually done. So you even referenced and tagged a few of them, but people will think that they were hypothetical, and they're not. So and this is, I think, the reason why I'm asking is not just for fun war stories, but this is, I think, where you, unlike so many other folks, have been able to curate all these different lessons from either different physical environments like countries that you've been in, or
Yep.
different contextual environments like certain industries,
Yeah.
or roles that you've had. But like just kind of, if you can go back and like pick off a few of those, because I know there's like 24, but just a few of those where you thought like that's where I owe that lesson from.
Yeah, I think like one of the ones that was the clearest was working with sort of like a guy who was affiliated with the royal family of Brunei, and we were selling luxury watches. And so we were going up to KL because we were selling a custom watch to the Sultan of Johor. And the guy, like, we're hanging out all week, you know, obviously we're in like a nice suite and stuff like that, and we're going to the polo matches because the one of the princes of Brunei is playing in this polo match. And I hang out with this guy, and we've got these like super expensive watches. We had just launched the watch brand at Wimbledon in partnership with Martina Navratilova earlier that year. And so on Friday, so we spent the whole week there, and then on Friday, the guy's like, "Hey, I'm going to Australia now. Do you want to just like come with me?" And I had to be like, "No, like, why would I do that? Like, I'm here as a professional helping manage this business. I'm not going to sort of follow you around." That's when I realized like I would never work in luxury, because a lot of what I'm doing is like that. So if you think about like, so in the way that I've framed what I'm doing, it's like business development. I'm obsessed with the creativity of enterprise, mapping out markets, understanding people and what motivates them, and building relationships. In luxury, it's very much about your client. And so like there were these entourages that would follow around these people. And it was really funny because like I met the guy, and he's like, "Oh, I just sell golf clubs." And like sometimes I have to pay to travel along with these people, and I pay for my meals and I pay for my hotels. But like once a year, one of these guys buys like $200,000 in golf clubs from me. And I was like, "Dude, you should be selling diamonds or cars probably, or something that's like higher margin or timeshares if you're going to be." And so, yeah, I think that was definitely like a really valuable lesson of like what my boundaries are as far as like my ways of working, or like like I want to win through working hard, not by like just being the guy closest to the golden goose.
Yeah, right. So was it just that it felt dirty to just be like at the whim and the caprice of some
Yeah, exactly.
powerful individual?
Yeah, like even if in the end, if like someone was like, "Yeah, but if you put 2 years into it and randomly you got $1 million, like wouldn't it all be worth it?" I'll be like, "No, not really. No, it's not really worth it. Like it's not, like I don't want to position myself in that way. I don't want to be like sort of like off. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that's the way to do it. It would be better to like win through mapping out the ecosystem, understanding insights versus, yeah, sort of like just being at the whim of somebody else." Yeah.
Yeah, because like even as you say that, I'm thinking, but wait a minute, it's not as if you won't do equally or greater like things of extreme in order to win a corporate business, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not like an inconveniently timed flight to Australia plus a bunch of other days and a total rework of your calendar
Yeah.
would be nothing but like a great adventure
Totally
and a
normal.
worthwhile investment if what it
Yeah.
was building like a brand to brand, piece of like a cornerstone for the future of the relationships, right?
Yeah.
But so it sounds, yeah, when you say it, it sounds to me that it's just like it's because it's not enterprise building. It's just sycophantic kind of opportunism.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like, I feel like you need to have like more self-respect. Like I would be more likely to be like an illegal gem dealer, because like that would be less about like basing yourself on like the whim of some other person.
Yeah.
So like that was one where I really like, after that I was like, yeah, I need to stop doing this. This is silly. And like we had lots of stuff like where like somebody would be like, "Yeah, I'm just not going to pay." You'd be like, "What do you mean? We just like spent like $500,000 building you this jewelry." And they're like, "Yeah, I didn't like the way you acted today, so I'm not going to pay." It's like, all right, we're gonna figure out how to do it. Like it's dealing with personalities in a way. Like I don't want to deal with so much so personalities. I want to build like value additive relationships where it's very clear on both sides, versus someone having so much control, I guess is like one example.
Well, I can kind of pick that up and say something that I think you'll probably agree with. Actually, I'll tell you what, why don't you just tell me if you agree with it or where you
Yeah.
disagree with it. But we built Sage because we had this sort of underlying, I'm trying to think if it's a value. There's an element to it that's a value, but it's maybe more like an argument that we wanted to make to the world, which is that sales is a very honorable craft. And I
Yeah.
mean honorable in like a deep old tradition, like there used to be a triumvirate. It's like you study like physics, mathematics, and rhetoric, and that was it. Like that was what a gentleman of Greek society would go do in order to operate well in the world. So, or honorable craft in the sense that a lot of the classic professions are. When I look at what business development, we'll use that word in the sense that you do it, and the sense you just defined. This requires numeracy, literacy, a deep sense of hard work and a work ethic, real control over yourself. So your executive function, your ability to organize yourself and keep priorities in mind and reprioritize all the time. Your emotional intelligence and your sort of fellow feeling, your theory of mind, your ability to like read human beings the way that you can read and interpret books. All of this has to come into play in a single human being. And when I see that, I'm like, this is a liberal art first, and it's a very honorable craft. And it's actually the essential craft in order for businesses to develop. Hence, it should be called business development. That also means that you have to go through a very thorough and principled education, which, by the way, like no university on the planet offers. So you have to get it elsewhere.
Yeah.
In order to be prepared to do this honorable craft. That to me is so exciting, and it's so interesting, and it's actually one of the reasons why you have to have a conversation like this one, because there are many honorable craftsmen, craftswomen out there, and that's the best and only place you can actually learn the nuanced detail about how to pull this off, this thing that you do, that I do, that we have to sort of teach and coach on.
Yeah.
What do you think? But I'll put that forward. That's my lens on it. Where am I missing? What do you think?
What you're saying like really encapsulates like all the different layers that we've sort of covered. So it's like, number one, you have to be an authentic person and be passionate about an ecosystem that you want to explore, whether that be golf or in my case, like venture capital and private equity. Then afterwards, you have to map out all the relationships in the market and you have to stay abreast of all the trends. Once you've mapped those out, you then have to prioritize your time constantly to go and then meet those people and be likable enough and then be able to stay in touch with the trends and be able to stay in touch with what they're doing. And then also constantly find the context to build deeper and deeper relationships. Because effectively what you're doing is you're trying to manage a whole ecosystem of your relationships, which you need to understand all their businesses, you need to understand them, you need to find context all the time. Be like, hey, congratulations for hiring this person, or I saw this article about this business, what do you think? That's a similar business. And yeah, so it sort of, it goes through all those layers. And then hopefully once you've done that, because you've committed to this space, you can drive effective outcomes without being super transactional, because you've already built all this goodwill and you already know within your ecosystem who needs what. So if you switch from, selling golf clubs to running a golf course, you're like, hey guys, like you like playing golf, like I've got this golf course, you love, this. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that's it's really interesting. And I probably wouldn't do anything else, because I think that it's like the most intellectually stimulating, because it's just such a broad and wide thing, but also while being focused on a specific thing that you're interested in or passionate about.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely. I could see you, and I could also see me because I have a better read on me. But I could doing this late into life too.
Yeah,
I would love doing this kind of craft in my 80s. There's no sort of, well, stick it out until earliest possible retirement age and then hang up the boots. It's like, why? It's fantastic. It's a great way to spend a day.
Yeah.
Do you ever think you're going to, let me ask you this before I ask you about that. Do you have anybody that is in your team right now? Or are you sort of training up some young folks underneath you at the moment?
So the way that I typically work is I always go into orgs and I build my teams from scratch. So like at Gojek, I was the first person international, and then there were hundreds of people afterwards. And then in enterprise sales, it was just me at first, and I was doing all of the market mapping and then building the relationships, and then eventually it was 17 people. Here it's just me now, and to be honest, I sometimes enjoy this part the most because I'm not responsible for anybody, so I can manage my time however I want. But the next step will be, hiring somebody in China and hiring more people here. We're also thinking about how we can approach India and get more deeply involved. So to give you an idea about like how we've grown as Cooley. So Cooley's office here is only 2 years old. I joined in January. At the time we had like 8 people. Now we have, I think, like over 30, which for a law firm is like pretty crazy because
it's meteoric.
Yeah, and no one's on peanuts here. So like we're doing a lot of business, and we're only going to continue to grow. So yeah, I guess that gives you an idea. Like we're going to continue to grow as sort of an ecosystem. We might even end up being at like 40 by the end of the year.
Well, I mean, that you've been in growth environments with an S at the end for a long time. That's native territory for you. But I think
it's scarier in this environment. It's way scarier because like it's one thing if you're growing as like a Gojek and you have people who are like ops people who are like very like like every single person here is like they went to like Harvard Law School or something like that. So it's a very different, like every once in a while I look at the partners, they're like, all right guys, like are you sure? Like, you want to keep adding logs to the fire? All right. Yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I thought you were going to segue to getting back into selling luxury watches, but this time only to your captive audience.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the last question was, you obviously have the ability to teach some folks, and that's something that I get excited when I see in the marketplace, people who are capable of the craft of sales or business development and capable and interested in teaching too. So the most natural place is when they kind of apprentice under you, because you show up at work each day. But if not, I want to cheerlead you to, write it as a book, or, put it into a model. Because I think some of the things that you have been coming up with as a framework on your own, very interesting, very compelling, and stuff that someone else either they just have to discover it for themselves, or never discover it at all. Those are their two options, unless somebody like you puts it down on paper. So if you ever get a sabbatical, I'd love to see the Andrew Murphy publication.
Well, I'm like, also I'm happy to work with you guys on anything, even if it's just like doing more talks or whatever.
Yeah, well, that would be great. I mean, there's actually, that's one of the things that's also interesting. People don't have to learn from somebody who happens to do their performance review and sign their paycheck. There's lots of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
So I think, and in particular for the kind of thing that you do, right? You're in a law firm, you're not a lawyer, but you provide this very unique function. And so you're sort of a multi-species.
Yeah.
You're a platypus. You're a business platypus.
Yeah. Just don't ask for legal advice.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so crazy. Like I have some of these founders, because I have such a deep relationship with them, that they end up calling me, and I'm like, man, I really don't want to give an opinion on this.
Yeah, I bet.
So funny. Like, how do I manage my board? My board members are mad at me, and I want to take like cash off the table, or like all sorts of weird things. We're like, oh man, I don't want to be liable for whatever happens here.
Hey, some people will hear this and pick this up and want to chase you up a little bit. What's the best place for them to do so?
LinkedIn's fine.
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I mean, on general social, I'm open. But yeah, LinkedIn's fine. Or LinkedIn's fine. I check it every day.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, it's awesome to speak with you again. Let's next time let's do Orchard Road again.
Sounds good. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew.
Later.